Luke's good to see you. I haven't talked to you since the election night. Things calmed down for you? Still busy?
It's like going 100 to 0 in 5 seconds. It's like going from NASCAR to Radiator Springs. It's a very hard stop. But, Gene, I was on the road with President Trump the entire last week of the campaign. I was flying around on Trump Force One. We were doing 15, 16, 17-hour days. It was ridiculous. The last night of the election, we landed back in West Palm Beach at like 6 a.m., and all the staff's falling asleep. They're like bouncing around the airplane. And Donald Trump is back there in his little spot holding court for everybody else that was awake. This man does not stop. And then when we landed, we got off, got a couple hours of sleep, went and voted over in West Palm Beach where he normally goes to the polls. And then we watched the returns come in. And I tell you what, it was exciting, but it was also very nerve-wracking because some of these states take so long to come in. But when they called Pennsylvania, a cheer went up, and I was backstage with President Trump when all of this came together, and he was not celebrating, pumping his fist. He was like, let's get out there, let's go to work. I've got my speech, let's go talk to the people. He was getting ready to go to work on day one, literally.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question about that, but I want to bring in Amanda Head. She's co-host alongside John Solomon for Just the News, No Noise on Real America's Voice. Welcome to FlashPoint, Amanda. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I totally get what Luke is saying, although there is also an element to this that feels like it's not over. I keep having to pinch myself because for so many of us, ever since 2020, we have fought and fought and fought, and everything in our lives, I hate to say it, not only professionally, but also personally, everything was through the lens of what the future of our country could look like as a result of the election. So while I am obviously gleeful that the election is over and we know that at least for the next 4 years, freedom is in charge, there's still a bit of an element to me that I have to keep reminding myself that while that fight is over, the fight still goes on because, you know, there's been, I hate to say it, there's been a dark cloud over what a lot of us do, especially as we work in politics. But things are settled, and it kind of feels like, you know, when you have a Christmas gift that's coming, but it doesn't arrive in time, so you get a printed out picture of it in a gift bag. We can see the picture of what the next administration is going to look like. We just don't have it yet, but it's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. All right. Well, let me show you this. People line the streets as President Trump returns to D.C. Watch. All right. Well, he was obviously there to meet with Joe Biden, and we got some pics. Let me show you this one. When's the last time you saw Joe Biden look this happy? Oh, wait a minute. I know when the last time you saw him look this happy. Show the other pic. It's when he put on a hat. You know, it's the same smile, the same, you know, Luke, this has been quite suspicious all along. You'd kind of wonder who he really did vote for.
Well, MAGA is a happy movement, so you can't help but smile whenever you're sitting beside Donald Trump or wearing a MAGA hat, I guess. Look, Joe Biden, I think, is reveling in the fact a little bit that Kamala Harris not only lost the election after he was unceremoniously dethroned, but she did worse than him in just about every single county across the nation, every single state across the nation. And Donald Trump also, I have to point out, won the popular vote. You remember when he beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, it was all about we must abolish the Electoral College because Donald Trump did not win the popular vote. Well, this time, not only did he sweep the Electoral College, he also won the popular vote, so you don't even hear a whisper of that anymore. And so Joe Biden probably feels vindicated a little bit because it just shows the fact that the Democrats, if they grab the horns and try to take control and shake up the fact that they didn't even have a single person that voted for Kamala Harris in the Democrat primary, it just shows that maybe they don't know best. Now, I don't think Joe Biden would have won against Donald Trump, but nobody could really definitively say that because he never ran against him a second time and got voted in the election. So it's just very interesting to see the aftermath of a Kamala Harris-Donald Trump matchup and then Joe Biden feel maybe a little bit vindicated.
Well, let me show you this picture. Amanda, look at this. There's President Trump with Joe and Jill. They're not wearing a blue tie or a blue dress. It's sort of purplish I don't know. Does that mean something?
Let's have a conversation about colors and fashion attire, shall we? Because I
Yes.
have it on pretty good authority that MAGA red suit that Joe Biden wore to vote on Election Day was absolutely on purpose. Look, we all know the palace intrigue. We've all heard all of the drama between Kamala Harris's camp and Joe Biden's camp, and I think that there is a ton of truth to that. But while I can't get in Joe Biden's head or his heart regarding what he ultimately felt about getting pushed out, I do know human nature, and I know that human nature would dictate that there would be a sense of bitterness and resentment there. So I don't even slight him for that. That meeting that took place a few days ago in the Oval Office with President Trump, y'all, I have not seen more smiles from Joe Biden, and not the typical Cheshire grin that we've seen from him in the past. These are genuine, warm, congenial smiles, and it's been pretty incredible to see. Now, this doesn't take away from all of the things that Joe Biden has done that I disagree with respect to the country. It doesn't take away from all of the corruption in Kazakhstan, in Romania, in Ukraine, in China, all of the fishy relationships, all of the misgivings of his son, all of the crimes. It doesn't take away from any of that. But I do think that on a human level, Joe Biden is, number one, relieved to be out of the spotlight and ready to move on with life. And number two, glad that he still reigns supreme as the only person who ever beat Donald Trump. And we can have a much larger conversation about whether he actually beat him. But anyway.
All right, well, let me show you this. Luke, Michael Whatley posts Pennsylvania tonight. The RNC is filing 2 new lawsuits. Bucks County, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, to stop the counting of illegal ballots. They won the court battle several times already. Let's be clear, Dave McCormick has won this race. Bob Casey lost. Democrat officials and lawyers are trying to sow doubt in the democratic process. Attorneys will not let it stand. I want to get your comment on that. But Luke, it seems what is different to me since this election was called is you don't see President Trump coming out talking about, we're going to think about who we're going to post and who we're going to nominate and who we're going to put in position. He's coming in like a house of fire, even with his nominations that are yet to be passed. He's coming in, and the same thing with these court battles. Now, all during the election, this is what I'm getting to here, Luke, all during the election night process, the days before and the day of, the RNC was busy fighting cheating at every possible level and getting some great decisions.
You're exactly right. The RNC was markedly different this time around, and mainly I believe it was because we changed the upper echelons of how that institution operated. It's very easy once you get up here. I'm in D.C. right now, and we're with a great group of conservatives that fight against permanent Washington and the swamp, but it is so easy to get so entrenched up here and isolated from the rest of the country that you just start operating behind closed doors as to what your personal best interest is. So folks had to go in there and clean out a lot of these contracts where we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on useless things, and we didn't have people who were in there who legitimately cared about our process and who legitimately cared about the well-being of the party. There were a lot of holdovers from decades gone by in the country club Republican style that the Trump presidency rejected, the Trump candidacy overcame. And so once we got rid of that and actually installed people who cared about the process, who cared about election integrity, you saw a lot of things change. You saw a highly successful election cycle across the nation, even on the down ballot races, outsourcing to competent groups like Charlie Kirk's organization and having these people go out and make sure that we got the ground game that was required for a presidential election victory and down ballot victory, but also focusing on election integrity. People like Laura Trump and Michael Whatley and a lot of the lawyers over there were locked and loaded, ready for the Democrats to come after them because they saw the type of lawfare that they would throw against Donald Trump and the Republicans, and they saw the sorts of games that Democrats like to play with attorneys general and also on the state level when it came to a lot of these ballots. You're seeing it play out right now in Pennsylvania, and the battle is not over. The fight is not done. We still have a lot of things that need to be warred out, or a lot of things that need to be fought out. And so I am very excited to see a drastic change, and frankly, one that I was skeptical of in the Republican Party.
Well, let's go to the other side, and let me show you what Chuck Schumer had to say as he's addressing the House. Watch.
Now let me turn to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Another closely contested election now comes to an end. To my Republican colleagues, I offer a word of caution in good faith. Take care not to misread the will of the people, and do not abandon the need for bipartisanship. After winning an election, the temptation may be to go to the extreme. We've seen that happen over the decades, and it's consistently backfired on the party in power. So instead of going to the extremes, I remind my colleagues that this body is most effective when it's bipartisan. If we want in the next 4 years the Senate to be as productive as the last 4, the only way that will happen is through bipartisan cooperation.
Bipartisan, bipartisan, bipartisan. Amanda, come on. It seems like to me they had the last 4 years to be bipartisan. I don't remember seeing any of that.
No, and listen, the soon-to-be minority leader, Chuck Schumer, I don't think anyone is going to be taking advice from him, especially considering 3 months prior to the election, he had such accurate and dire anticipation of what was going to happen to his majority in the Senate that he ended up pulling funding from Senate campaigns. I don't think anybody should be taking advice from him. But isn't it strange that they always want bipartisanship when they are the side that's losing? Look, there was a referendum that was sent to Washington, D.C. in this election, and it was that the American people are sick of what Democrats are selling. Republicans won the House, they won the Senate, Donald Trump won the White House and the popular vote. And when you consider that mandate to Washington, and look, Chuck Schumer is one of these swamp dwellers who has been around since all of us, I think, were born. He's one of those people, he's exactly the type of person, just like Nancy Pelosi, who's not going, that message is not going to be received. And when I think back at, President Trump's re-election efforts in 2020 and what happened, I always reflect this back to the word and what happened then. And, the Christian song, you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. The enemy meant 2020 for evil. And look at what it turned out to be. And I tweeted this out last week. It had to be this way because if President Trump had won re-election in 2020, he wouldn't have had this mandate, this public mandate via the popular vote. Did he have the House at that point? He didn't have the House at that point. He didn't have the Senate. So this time around, it had to happen this way for President Trump to be able to enact his agenda. And look, for Democrats, I don't know what policy point they have left that resonates with the American people. You look at the number of zip codes in this country that make under $100,000 in the donations that came from those areas towards President Trump versus the other side. Donald Trump and the Republican Party not only is the big tent party now, but it's the party of Main Street. Democrats are the party of the wealthy elite, and you finally have the New York Times admitting to the fact that all of these celebrity endorsements for Kamala Harris did not work. They didn't move the needle for her, and they possibly might have hurt her because it turns out when people have to pay $4 for a dozen eggs or $6 for butter, the social issues and the things that bother Hollywood don't matter in an election.
No, they don't. And Luke, speaking of that, and I get your comment about Chuck Schumer's statement there. They had to pay for those people. They had to pay for Beyonce. Had to pay. Paid pretty heavily. Go ahead, Luke. Your comment.
Yeah. Well, they were astroturfing their campaign, and it didn't work out for them in the end. To the Chuck Schumer thing, I had this stupid example in my mind as I was listening to that of when I was growing up and I had a pool noodle and I'd hit my brother with it repeatedly, and I was just continually doing that until he got the pool noodle, and then I was, we're friends, we're okay, everything's cool. Well, the Democrats are saying we must have bipartisanship, we must work together. A few weeks ago, they were telling us that we were literally Hitler, that we were domestic terrorists, that we were a threat to the Republic, and now they want bipartisanship. My question to Chuck Schumer, because I know he's specifically referring to a lot of the appointments that Donald Trump is going to be making, is do you think that it is bipartisanship to have somebody like the Attorney General go after school parents who are going up to these school board meetings and labeling them as domestic terrorists, going around in the parking lot and taking down license plate numbers and labeling them as a threat to democracy? Or how about going over to the Department of Transportation, appointing somebody whose only qualification is that they lost a 2020 Democrat presidential election in a primary, and somebody who is gay? Like, I'm sorry, but if I'm flying on an airplane, I don't care if the Department of Transportation secretary has a sexual orientation. I don't want the door of the airplane to fall off. I want somebody who is actually competent in these positions. And the Democrats are over here saying that these people are not qualified that Donald Trump is putting up. Or maybe we even go over to the Department of Defense, because don't forget, Lloyd Austin is the one who said we must put a stop We must have a day of stand down. I think it was like 60 or 90 days to address extremism in the United States military, and spent 5 million man hours in the U.S. military to address 0.005% of individuals who were in that military who probably already had a record in the past as well. So all of these ridiculous things that the Democrats have done, and now that we're the ones who are in control and in power, they're saying, okay, well, maybe we need to slow down and pause a little bit. That's not fair. That's not going to fly. And I think Donald Trump's appointments so far are showing that this is a referendum on the way that Washington has been operating so far, and the pendulum's going to swing back, because we're going to root out things like the Department of Justice and these bureaucracies that have just hurt the American people over and over again for years.
Yeah, without a doubt. And let's go back in time here a little bit, and let me show you. This is such a long clip. We're going to break it up. There's so many comments about President Trump. Some of these I had forgotten, but watch this. President Trump will never, ever be president. Watch, part
There's
one.
not going to be a President Donald Trump. That's not going to happen.
Donald Trump will not become president.
He's not going to be president. He is not, Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States. Take it to the bank.
Okay.
I guarantee it.
All right, all right.
I think if he becomes the president, he'll make it great, because the States is already great.
I think that man will be president of the United States right about the time that spaceships come down filled with dinosaurs and red capes.
On that note, Tom, pleasure.
Take it
Thank
from
you very
me.
much.
How about that?
Cheers, Tom.
And then, of course, there's Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been saying that he will run for president as a Republican, which is surprising since I just assumed he was running as a joke.
Donald Trump, just last week, he confirmed to the National Review that he is again considering a run in 2016.
Do it. Do it. Look at me. Do it. I will personally write you a campaign check now on behalf of this country, which does not want you to be president, but which badly wants you to run.
I wonder if he ever wrote that campaign check. Be interesting to find it. All right, Amanda. I mean, you saw that we had everything from politicians to entertainers to comedians, and that's just part one of this. Say Trump would never be president. Why do you think there was such animosity? I mean, this to waste time like they did talking about this candidate they so thought was never going to make it. Obviously, he did. What would be the purpose in all that anyway?
You know, it just oozes elitism, and it makes my stomach turn. And no, Nancy Pelosi, I'm not going to take that to the bank. I will, however, take your stock portfolio and your very prescient stock purchase and sell decisions. I will take that to the bank. But let's talk about that very first person that showed up there. George Clooney. I think that George Clooney maybe should stop calling balls and strikes when it comes to endorsing candidates, because lest we forget, it was kind of George Clooney's muscle in conjunction with Barack Obama that got Joe Biden out of the race to begin with. And you guys were discussing just a moment ago that Joe Biden did better against Donald Trump than Kamala Harris did. I'm sure you've all seen this graphic that shows the areas across the country, and it had red rightward arrows and blue leftward arrows, and the entire country was littered with red rightward arrows, indicating all of the places across this country that moved more in Donald Trump's direction. The fact that you have these border communities that are 97% Hispanic that are going overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. The fact that President Trump moved the needle in every single category. President Trump had a message. He had a clear message. He had clear policy prescriptions that, frankly, the types of people who endorse Kamala Harris kind of reflect her policy. You know, Kamala Harris, it was very hard to pin her down on policy, and when you could finally get her to say something, it was quite scrambled and vapid, and that kind of reflects the sentiment or the character, I think, of these celebrities. You know, there are a lot of characters in Hollywood, but there's hardly any character. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're a political candidate, you should say at this point, I don't want any more celebrity endorsements, because when you have mashups like that of all of these people who are making a joke out of Donald Trump, look, the joke's on them.
Yeah, it was indeed. All right, so Luke, let's move along here. Senator Thune wins majority leader vote. A lot of us are not real happy about it, but let's watch this clip.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here.
It's a new day in the United States Senate, and it's a new day in America. The American people have loudly rejected the failed policies of the Biden, Harris, Schumer agenda. And this Republican team is united. We are on one team. We are excited to reclaim the majority and to get to work with our colleagues in the House to enact President Trump's agenda. We have a mandate from the American people, a mandate not only to clean up the mess left by the Biden, Harris, Schumer agenda, but also to deliver on President Trump's priorities. We will make sure that the President and his team have the tools and the support that they need to enforce border security laws and to remove the violent criminals who are wreaking havoc in every one of our states. We will work to make America prosperous again by streamlining the bureaucratic machine and overturning costly Biden-Harris regulations. And we will work to restore American energy dominance, not just our energy security, but energy dominance, which will lower costs and bolster our national security. I'm excited to get to work with this team right away, and I want to thank my colleagues who placed their faith in me to serve as leader, and to those who were supporting another candidate. I promise to be a leader who serves the entire Republican conference. We'll have an ambitious agenda, and we'll take each and every Republican working together to be successful.
All right, Luke, let me get your take on John Thune as Majority Leader.
I think Rick Scott would have been a far better pick for this leader position. I will say it is encouraging to hear him say things like we must deliver on an agenda that President Trump is laying out for all of America, which means that their forward-facing intention is to put forward these promises that Donald Trump has laid out. It also means that Trump is in charge to a particular point of the legislative priorities of the U.S. Senate. But if there is one institution in all of government that is just has a spiritual gift for messing things up, it is the United States Senate, and for getting off of track, because those people don't have to go up for re-election every 2 years. They are solidified in that institution by a 6-year term. So the American people in politics have a very short memory. So the ones who are not up for re-election in the next 2 years can probably do things a little bit more recklessly against the Trump agenda than those who might be coming up for an election in this upcoming cycle. So it is my hope and prayer that the Senate delivers on the things that they are saying, but just as many politicians in Washington have said before, I don't believe that I would put my entire emphasis or hope in that one institution, especially the United States Senate. Gene, I quickly have to pivot back to what we were discussing just a second ago on Hollywood, because all of the clips that you were just playing, I wrote down a few of the members. George Clooney, who has just said that he's now taking a step back from politics after his major failure. Bernie Sanders, who tremendously lost the Democrat nomination primary back in 2000 and I believe it was 16. John Oliver, whose ratings are declining and thinks he has some sort of influence, and used the last clip on his YouTube channel to beg the American people not to vote for Donald Trump. Nancy Pelosi, who is now out of power but tried to use her influence in the back room to swap out Joe Biden at the end. All of these people at one point in time seemed insurmountable, either within the media or in the Democratic Party or in the past 2024 election, and all of them in some form or fashion have been defeated. It is a David and Goliath situation. I mean, even I had my doubts heading into the 2024 election. We had worked as hard as we could, but I was hearing people in the media say one thing. I was hearing my friends say another thing. I was hearing all these different voices. But if you keep your eye on the prize, and if you move forward in what your heart is true and what is based off of the Word of God and the principles and the morals and the values that He has laid out, that's when David overcomes Goliath. And so don't be discouraged if you start to hear all of these naysayers, even if they're in the upper strongholds of power, because God can overcome all of that.
Amen.
All right. Well, let me show you this Majority Leader thoughts on his appointments. Watch.
And when it comes to choosing nominees who will pass Senate confirmation?
Well, as you know, the Senate has an advise and consent role under the Constitution, so we will do everything we can to process his noms quickly, get them installed in their position so they can begin to implement his agenda.
All right, so he's going to go quickly here, Amanda. I mean, this is what we said earlier. I think we all agree. He's come in not with, I'm thinking about who I want. He's already got a plan. He's already putting it into place. And these things are coming hard and fast. Although I don't think anyone was quite expecting, what happened with Matt Gaetz. Your thoughts?
I would like to take him at his word. Unfortunately, all of us covering politics, we know that Washingtonian, Capitol Hill type politician people, they lie as often as they open their mouth oftentimes. There are some that are a little bit more honest, but I hope that this is true. You know, President Trump and Senator Thune have had a bit of a dicey relationship, and of course, John Thune is definitely, historically, has not been on the MAGA side of things. I hope that the message has been sent that this is President Trump's Senate. This is President Trump's White House. It's President Trump's House, and they need to be enacting his agenda. And I certainly hope that the Republicans who voted to confirm Merrick Garland will vote to confirm Matt Gaetz. I don't know how, as a Republican, you can vote to confirm him and not Matt Gaetz. I will also say, with respect to judicial appointments, I am going to absolutely love, especially these first 2 years, seeing all of these conservative justices or appointees, nominees getting through the process. I saw a viral video online that was so funny. It was that video that a lot of us have seen of this old lady at the slot machine in Vegas, and she just keep tapping the button. And the caption was something to the effect of, you know, the United States Senate confirming 30-year-old conservative justices who are going to serve out a 40-year term the rest of their life. And I certainly hope that that's the case, because the larger conversation in all of this is how corrupt every single institution in Washington is, including the Senate and including the DOJ. And when you have someone like Matt Gaetz at the top of it, someone who not only, by the way, is a really good lawyer. I don't know his background as far as a trial lawyer, but I know anytime you have watched him in any type of investigative hearing on Capitol Hill, he uses almost surgical precision-like skills when it comes to questioning. So not only does he have the skills, I think, that's required, he's incredibly competent, but he also has the drive. And that's been the issue all along. In the past, you know, obviously issues with Jeff Sessions, but when you have an attorney general who doesn't necessarily have the fire to break down the institution, heck, at this point, we need to nuke the institution and kind of start all over from scraps. But when you have someone at the top who doesn't have the desire, it doesn't matter if they have the skills. But I think that Matt Gaetz is a unique combination of both, and there's one common thread with almost all of these nominations thus far. It is a desire to transform. And whether you're talking about, it doesn't matter which agency you're talking about in Washington, transformation has got to happen, because the American people are sick of the way that Washington has been run.
I believe you're absolutely right, which is why it's up to us to keep pressure on our individual leaders. Eric Doherty writes this: just in, upwards of 10 GOP senators will not vote to confirm Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, says Richard Blumenthal, CBS. Of course, Richard Blumenthal, CBS, there's a lot of things in there I'm not really trusting here, Luke, but I'll leave you a chance to comment on that first.
Well, I worked for Matt for 5 years. I was his communications director on Capitol Hill for several years. As press secretary, ran his campaign in 2018. So I know Matt, and he's nothing if not tenacious. I think when it comes down to it, there was one quote that really stood out to me that he said back in like 2019, when a lot of the MAGA Republicans were coming to Capitol Hill. He said that the caddies had taken over the country club. And I think that that is true of these cabinet appointments. I have referred to it as Donald Trump's suicide squad against the swamp. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need a lot of disruptors who are coming up to the swamp. On a realistic standpoint, I cannot help but think that Matt Gaetz has a math problem when it comes to the U.S. Senate. I think that not a single Democrat is going to vote for him, and he has upset a lot of Republican senators over the years who have been very vocal against him. And so while they will be put in a precarious situation, I just go back to what I was talking about before, where a lot of these people can make bad votes and vote against people that Donald Trump has nominated and still get reelected because they have the power of incumbency and the fact that a lot of people just forget about a lot of things over a number of years, and they have 6 years to fundraise since their previous election. So I hope that we have disruptors in the Department of Justice and every level of government. I'm curious to see how this plays out in the U.S. Senate, because I just have this gut feeling that there's going to be some complications because the margin right there is so slim. But it just also shows how tenacious Donald Trump is about making sure that we basically completely go against the lawfare that has plagued our federal bureaucracies and our federal government for so long. Putting somebody in there who was never charged with a crime, but that had investigations levied against him at every level from the Department of Justice that could have tarnished his entire life, but because he was so adamant about coming back and bouncing back from it and being so vocal, it did not happen. So it is my hope that we see all of Donald Trump's appointees or nominations that get into power. But I just look at the U.S. Senate as a chamber as a whole, and I have my doubts that the math is going to math at the end of all of this.
All right, let me welcome Texas State Representative District 93, Nate Schatzline. Nate, good to see you.
Oh, it's great to be with you as always, Gene, with our FlashPoint Army. Always an honor.
Yeah, and congratulations again on your win. Let's talk about what you're doing right there in what legislation you've introduced.
Absolutely. So obviously, we are going into what I believe is going to be the most conservative session in the history of the state of Texas, as we have really just gutted rhinos from the Texas House, traveling around with Attorney General Ken Paxton, Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and getting these guys that have betrayed their voters for so many years out of office, and about 20 new fighters into the Texas legislature. And so we've grown our numbers, and it's time to reform the Texas House. Kick out Dade Phelan, who Donald Trump said it's time to kick Dade Phelan out, get a new speaker, and pass bold legislation that I believe is going to rewrite history and is going to lead the way across America for our movement of our Christian conservative values. And one of those bills is HB 1071 that I just filed, which is the Texas Adoption Assistance Program, officially making private adoption free in the state of Texas, with a grant program that is going to partner with local churches to make sure that families can give forever homes to our most vulnerable.
Yeah, Nate, what struck me about the adoption assistance program is that this really will save the state money.
Yes, no, and this is what people are not understanding, is that right now we are spending millions upon millions perpetuating what I believe to be some pretty horrific things within our foster care system, which we know that needs total reform in Texas. In the foster care system in Texas, there's over 21,000 students that are in their care. Children, the cases with abuse, the cases of neglect are so vast that we had to do something that was going to change the game. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that instead of putting them in a broken system that's over inundated, that's quite literally incentivized for children to stay in the system, we want to give a one-time grant to families, thus saving the state massive amounts of money and making sure that children have the best chance for success for their future.
Yeah, so on one hand, we have people that want to abort the babies. Then we have the other hand, this big business of keeping them in the system. So this is a great opportunity.
Well, Gene, I mean, that's a great point right there. That's a great point right there. We've got businesses that are paying to go for their employees to go and have free abortions in New Mexico and Arizona, you name it. And now we're saying, no. If you want to make abortion free, we're going to make adoption free, to remove every single argument that we're just pro-birth. No, we are actually pro-life in the state of Texas.
All right. So you need to keep us up to date. How can we come alongside you in this?
Well, we're going to have Adoption Day at the Texas House coming into this next session, where we're going to invite pastors, faith leaders, families, adoptive parents to come in and testify for this bill once it gets a hearing. But the big thing is this: nothing's going to happen if we allow Dade Phelan, a true rhino, someone who killed our border bill, someone who delayed our ban on gender mutilation of minors, someone who has stood in the way of conservative policy for almost a decade, if we allow him to be speaker. And so I would encourage you, if you're in Texas, reach out to your state representative and let them know that you want them to vote for the reform candidate, which is David Cook. That's David Cook running for Texas House Speaker, so that we can actually reform the Texas House and we can make Texas conservative again.
Let me go to Amanda on this. You hear Nate talking about this Texas Adoption Assistance Program that he's put forth. I mean, this is the type of legislation that I think the American people really want to get behind, because it cuts costs, but it also helps the family unit, and it's better for the child. Am I missing something, or you agree with that?
No, I think that's spot on across the board. And if I could for just a moment, we all saw Dade Phelan try to trip up Ken Paxton throughout the course of this past year. And on our last topic about Matt Gaetz, I would say that I would certainly take Ken Paxton as a backup to Matt Gaetz, because I think that he would be absolutely fierce in the Department of Justice. But this is one of those bills that is another one of the outside the box approaches. I think it was at National Religious Broadcasters Convention last May. President Trump actually came on our TV show and was talking about something that he was going to call Parent Corps, that would be similar to Job Corps. That's another one of these outside the box initiatives with respect to adoption, where they would pair expectant moms who were not wanting to carry out that pregnancy with parents who were wanting to have children. And just like you were seeing there in Texas, I mean, this is the type of legislation that we should have seen decades ago. And look, I know that there are still plenty of people out there who are concerned about the future of women's rights. It's not even that, it's the life of children and the rights of children. But I love what Texas is doing. Texas is one of the states that we are considering bailing to. We're calling it our halfway house state at this point. So Texas, you might have a new resident from California. However, when I arrive there and you see our California license plates, don't worry, we are bringing our politics with us, but it's not California politics.
Well, good. Well, in that case, you're in. You will have to get. You will have to take part in the Second Amendment training, though, when you come to the border. All right, Luke Ball, what do you think this abortion or the adoption program that Nate's bringing forth? Think it's something that we need to get behind?
Not just in Texas, but every state. It is so important right now because a lot of Christians seem to tune out a little bit after Roe versus Wade was overturned. But that was not a concession to Christians to say you may now give up and go home. It was a mandate to Christians that you must now get involved in your individual states. So across the United States of America, we now have these states that have to have laws that are passed. Some of them you even saw on the ballot this past election time. Some of them may come down in the future. And then if they are bad laws, then it is incumbent upon the Christians in that state to fight to change those laws. And so we need these state legislatures who are having an increasingly important role in protecting the life of the unborn, because Donald Trump has said we are passing this back down to the states. I'm getting it out of the federal government. I'm now putting down at the individual state level, which is a charge to people who believe that life begins at conception, that life is precious in the womb, that life must be protected, and that a society can be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable, to get up and start getting involved by either running for office or doing your due diligence in researching the candidates who are supporting pro-life legislation on the state level. You know what irritated me more than anything this past election, Gene, was looking in states like North Carolina that elected Donald Trump by a pretty decent margin, but then elected a Democrat governor, a Democrat lieutenant governor, a Democrat attorney general, and gave the General Assembly more Democrat seats. And I'm thinking these people had to go into the voting booth and vote for Donald Trump and nobody else and walk out. Well, you did maybe 1/10 of your civic duty by walking in there and ignoring all the others. In fact, you did quite a disservice. You probably did more damage by walking in there and only voting for Donald Trump than if you had just stayed home, because it means that you put forth the effort to show up and then ignore the crucial down ballot races that make the difference in the pro-life issues. So if you made that mistake this time, never make it again, and make sure that you understand every single candidate that is on your ballot.
That's so true. Down ballot, very important. Let me show you but just how far, the thoughts on life, since you brought it this way. I'm going to show you this from Elon Musk. Now, before we play it, Elon is not your pastor. I'm not saying he should be. You don't get your religious, your theological discourse from Elon, but there's some cracks showing, and this is some good signs. Watch.
My opinion is that if a baby can survive outside the womb, it cannot be aborted. It cannot. So if a baby can survive outside the womb, if it is far enough in gestation to survive outside the womb, at that point it is not abortion, it is murder.
So it's a start. It's a place that we get to start, and things are definitely, I know, Luke, it's a little start, but I'll take even a little start considering what we've had to deal with, and gives us all something to pray about with his impact in the whole political process.
We're moving in the right direction.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
I'll take that. It's a good move. I have to say this because people go, oh, no, you guys are endorsing. No, just stay with it. Stay with it. All right. Let me show you part 2 of President Trump will never be president.
When you stand and deliver that State of the Union address, in no part of your mind or brain can you imagine Donald Trump standing up one day and delivering a State of the Union address?
Well, I can imagine it in a Saturday night skit. I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president.
He will never be president of the United States.
And we better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket next.
I know you don't believe that, but I want to go on.
Sorry to laugh.
Okay, here we are. And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump.
And so, right now, Mr. Trump, to answer your call for political honesty, I just want to say, you're not going to be president, all right? It's been fun. It's been great. I love you. But come on, buddy. All, let's say, cow poo-poo aside, there is zero chance we'll be seeing you being sworn in on the Capitol steps with your hand on a giant golden Bible.
I'll make a prediction, though, for you. And I don't really get into predictions much, but this one I'll go way out on a limb. Donald Trump will never, ever be president of the United States. That Trump should not be in this race. He's an absurdity. He is a travesty.
Donald Trump will never be elected president of the United States.
Donald Trump is a here today, gone tomorrow candidate for president of the United States. Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States. Ever respectful of the fact that the people have not voted, he's not going to be president of the United States.
Let's be clear. Donald Trump will lose the election.
Don't you just love videotape? All right, Amanda, I'll give you a first shot at all that.
Yeah, first of all, let's note that every single one of those late night shows, except for one, have declined in ratings. And the one that didn't decline in ratings, it's because it doesn't exist anymore. And Joy Reid's sitting there with that glib look on her face because in the last week, she's been talking about the clown car of President Trump's nominations. Let's talk about the clown car of Joe Biden's nominations and the people who filled his cabinet, Mr. Dog Mask in the Army, click-clack Cooper guy, the White House intern with the long fake nails, Karine Jean-Pierre, the list goes on and on of clown car appointments of that administration. But we started out with the Barack Obama clip, and I have to say Barack Obama's legacy is all but dust at this point, and he has no one to thank except for his own vice president. Joe Biden getting ousted by his own party, and then within 30 minutes endorsing Kamala Harris such that the Democrat Party would not have a chance to hold an open primary. Joe Biden knew exactly what he was doing. So if Barack Obama wants to have this, the audacity of all of these people, it just goes to show you that when you live in places like this, in Los Angeles and some of these other places, Luke is in Washington, D.C., when you live in places like that, and you don't have to be surrounded by the American people, you totally lose touch. And this is why Donald Trump, another one of his innovative outside-the-box ideas, is moving these governmental institutions out of Washington. Because when the FDA and the EPA have to be neighbors with the potato farmers in Idaho, maybe they're going to be a little less willing to pass 1,001 regulations and restrictions on the way to permitting their new tractor. That's another one of those great ideas, and the people of featured in that clip will never understand that.
Amanda Head, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
All right. Let me go to Nate Schatz's line. Nate, what are your thoughts there? You saw that. You missed part one, but part two, there you go.
Well, I'll tell you this right now. The reality is we are facing an America that is waking up. They are dying to the wokeism, and they are awakening to what is real. And we're looking at a president, our future president, Donald J. Trump, who truly answered the call of conservative populism across our nation. And I think the mainstream media doesn't know what to do with the fact that America is finally speaking their voices, even down to our minority populations in South Texas. We look at precincts that have never gone Republican, have awoken to be Republican. We look at our swing states, how Donald J. Trump won every single one of those swing states. And what I would say is, I've had pastors tell me, well, maybe this will give us a seat at the table as the church to be able to speak into those policies. And what I would say is we absolutely are getting a seat at the table. I believe Donald J. Trump is more ready to allow pastors to have a seat at that table. But my warning to them would be this: do not get comfortable, because for all of those swing states that we won, we also see abortion that also won on that ballot. We have so much work to do in states like Arizona. The reality is, I do not want to see this conservative populism wave that has swept our country turn into a godless populism wave, because we would do no better than Rome did if that is the case. And we are not Rome. We are a constitutional republic founded on Christian principles. And if pastors don't continue to speak up, if pastors don't continue to let their voices be heard, then this populism could go in the other direction as well.
That's true. You know, I'm glad you brought it to that point, Luke, as Nate's talking about the whole thing with the pastors and our responsibility as Christians, not just pastors. Our responsibility in America here in these next few years is immense. If we really do want to see America turn, we can't do what we normally do, is go, hey, we got our guy in as president, and just, you know, dust our hands off and move on. Your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of times we say, like, it's a political race, or we have to get across the finish line, which, you know, connotates the fact that it means that we can rest at the end of it, or that we are done at the end of it. We are very far from done. This is never going to end. You know that this race that we talk about is not something that ends unless America ends. And if that happens, it means that we failed. This race that we run in this mission field of politics is ever going and is always continuing. There's going to be an endless amount of opportunities here. And I love what Nate was just saying there about conservative populism versus just general populism, because we know what happens when just the will of man reigns supreme. We have bad things that happen to our society. And I just go back to thinking about the people over in Hollywood who were saying Donald Trump will never be president. And you get into these echo chambers over there in Hollywood. It's kind of like here in Washington, D.C., and you hear all of the things that your friends are saying, and all of your friends are involved in liberal progressive politics, and they basically have this clique over there, and they are treated with such respect and dignity on these movie sets and in this culture that they really legitimately feel like they run the entire world. And then they get smacked with reality whenever they have the Republican president get sworn into power, not just once, but twice in their lifetime, that they said would never be president of the United States. So if you start to get that sense of mentality where it's like man's populism must reign supreme, that's when lies start to replace truth, and that's when you start to basically cover your eyes and you allow the wool to go over your eyes. We have to keep our eyes on this sense of a Christian conservative populism, because I think that's what's going to take hold as we start to see change radically happen in our country. I mean, we've already seen the heart of the nation shift a little bit. I was told for years that Roe versus Wade being overturned would be the deciding factor in the presidential election, and Kamala Harris didn't even come close to winning the Electoral College by any standard of the last century of U.S. presidential elections. And so I think that the American people are ready for truth. They are ready for science, but they're not ready for the left's fake science. They're ready for science that points back to a creator and a natural law and a revealed law, something that dictates how we institute policy and how we govern ourselves.